You've had the same task on your list for 3 days. You open it, feel a wave of resistance, and close it again. Marcus Aurelius found the cure for exactly this. 3 techniques you can use tonight. It's 7 p.m. You told yourself you'd start at 6. Now you're negotiating, maybe after dinner, maybe tomorrow morning when you're fresher. The task hasn't changed, only the excuses have. And here's the part nobody tells you. The fix is not about motivation at all. Around 170 AD, on the Danube frontier in what is now Central Europe, a Roman emperor sat in a campaign tent after a day of military decisions and wrote private notes by lamplight. He was exhausted, behind on correspondence, and he knew it. He wrote to himself, "You have been putting this off." That man was Marcus Aurelius, and those notes became the Meditations, one of the most direct documents ever written about the daily battle between intention and avoidance. He wasn't writing philosophy for posterity. He was talking himself into doing the work. That is exactly your situation right now. What he discovered, and what Epictetus had already taught a generation earlier in his lectures, is that procrastination is not a time problem or an energy problem. It is a perception problem. You have framed the task as larger than a single moment, and that framing is a lie. The techniques that follow are designed to break the lie. The first technique is called the next single act. The mechanic is brutally simple. You never ask yourself to do the whole task. You ask yourself to do only the next physical action, the one move that takes less than 90 seconds to begin. Marcus Aurelius writes in Book 5 of the Meditations that at dawn, when you resist getting up, you are not resisting the cold or the effort. You are arguing with a thought about the whole day. He instructs himself to simply place his feet on the floor, not to get dressed, not to plan the morning. Feet on the floor. That's the entire instruction. Tonight, if you have a report to write, your next single act is not write the report. It is open the document and type the date at the top. That is the complete task. You are not committing to finishing. You are committing to one physical gesture, and then the next one becomes visible. The same principle works for anything with a creative or emotional weight. If you owe someone a difficult email, one you've been avoiding for a week, your next single act is to open a blank draft and type just the recipient's name, nothing else. The blank page is no longer blank, and your brain recalibrates what starting means. Physical displacement also counts. If you have been avoiding a hard conversation, the next single act is walking to the room where that person is, not speaking yet, just moving your body toward the thing. Marcus Aurelius understood that the body often has to drag the mind into action, not the other way around. Notice what you just did with those 3 examples. You didn't motivate yourself. You didn't wait to feel ready. You made a single physical decision so small that resistance couldn't get traction. That is the entire engine of Technique 1. But the second technique is where it actually clicks, because the next single act works on starting. This next one works on the resistance that shows up 10 minutes in when the task gets genuinely hard and you want to bail. Technique 2 is the obstacle reframe. The mechanic. Every time you hit friction inside a task, you reclassify that friction as the task itself, not an interruption to it. Epictetus says in the Discourses that the event is never the problem. Only your judgment of the event creates the problem. Marcus Aurelius sharpened this idea into a single line. The impediment to action advances action. What blocks the way becomes the way. He wasn't being poetic. He was describing a functional switch in attention. When you hit a wall, you have 2 choices. Narrate it as evidence you should stop, or narrate it as the actual material you are here to work through. Here's what this looks like in practice. You are writing a proposal and you reach the section where you don't know the answer. The old move is to stop, open a browser, and spend 40 minutes on something unrelated. The obstacle reframe says, not knowing the answer here is the task. You write a placeholder. I need to figure out X. You move to the next section. The friction has been named and left in place rather than fled. The second worked example. You are studying for a certification exam and hit a concept you genuinely don't understand. Your instinct is to reread the section you already know well because it feels like progress. The obstacle reframe says the confusing concept is not a detour, it is the road. You write the confusing concept at the top of a blank page and stare at it for 2 minutes before doing anything else. You have reclassified it as the destination, not the obstacle. This reframe also works at the emotional level. If a task makes you feel inadequate, if you keep avoiding a project because somewhere underneath you're afraid it won't be good enough, the obstacle reframe says, the fear of inadequacy is the work right now. You are not supposed to feel confident first. The discomfort is not a warning sign. It is the entrance. 2 techniques in. You have a way to start and a way to keep going through resistance. But there is a third layer, the one that explains why the same task keeps appearing on your list week after week, even after you've used the first 2. Technique 3 is the mortality reset. The mechanic. Before you dismiss a task for the day, you spend 30 seconds doing one calculation. Not how long the task will take, but how many days you probably have left to do anything at all. Marcus Aurelius returns to mortality more than any other subject in the Meditations, not as morbid theater, but as a precision instrument for clarifying what actually matters today. He writes that you could leave life right now, and that thought should determine what you do and say and think. He was not a young man writing this. He was an emperor who had buried children and watched friends die. He earned every syllable. The mortality reset does not ask you to feel the weight of death every time you sit at your desk. It asks you to do one honest calculation. If you are 35 years old, you have roughly 16,000 days left on a reasonable estimate. Tonight's task is one action inside one of those days. That reframe shrinks the dread and inflates the value of the present moment at the same time. Worked example. You have been putting off a difficult phone call, telling someone something they won't want to hear. You've delayed it for 2 weeks. The mortality reset is not, life is short, make the call. It is a literal question. If I have 16,000 days, is this the one where I spend another evening pretending I'm going to do it tomorrow? Most people, sitting with that number for 30 seconds, find the answer arrives without any drama. The second worked example for this technique. A project you genuinely care about, a business idea, a creative work, a letter to someone important, has been living in a folder for months. You open it, feel the gap between what it is and what it could be, and close it again. The mortality reset says that gap is not a reason to wait. It is the only thing you'll regret on a much shorter timeline than you're currently assuming. Epictetus made a version of this point in his lectures when he described people who keep saying, "When I have more time," or "when circumstances are better." He was direct about it. You are deceiving yourself about how many postponements remain available to you. This is not cruelty. It is the most useful fact you can hold in your hands while sitting in front of a task. Now, the common pitfall. This is the mistake that causes people to try these 3 techniques for 2 days, decide they don't work, and go back to their old relationship with avoidance. The mistake is using these techniques as motivational self-talk, reciting them inside your head as affirmations while you continue sitting still. The next single act only works if you physically do the next action within 10 seconds of naming it. The obstacle reframe only works if you write the obstacle down on paper or screen, making it external and visible. The mortality reset only works if you actually sit with the number, not just nod at the concept. Marcus Aurelius understood this failure mode precisely. He writes in the Meditations that a man who reads philosophy without acting on it is like someone who recites the rules of medicine but never treats a patient. The words become a substitute for the action rather than a trigger for it. If you leave this video and find yourself thinking about these techniques instead of doing them, you have made this exact mistake. The corrective is mechanical. Write the 3 technique names on a physical card and put it next to your keyboard, not as inspiration, as a checklist. When you feel resistance, you don't ask which technique applies here. You run through all 3 in sequence, name the next single act, reclassify the obstacle, and do a 30-second mortality calculation. The whole sequence takes under 2 minutes. There is something worth pausing on here. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful person in the known world when he wrote these notes. He had every reason to defer, to delegate, to wait. Armies and senators and petitioners demanded his attention every hour, and still he sat down in a tent on a cold frontier and talked himself into doing the work. Not because he felt like it, because he had decided that feeling like it was never going to be the criterion. That decision is available to you right now. Not the emperor's circumstances, those are gone, but the decision itself. That readiness is not a prerequisite, that the only moment that exists is the one in which you are currently sitting, and that the task in front of you is worthy of the day you are spending. Tonight, before you sleep, you will have one more opportunity to either do the thing or defer it. When that moment arrives, you now have 3 moves. Name the next physical action and do it within 10 seconds. When you hit friction, write it down and reclassify it as the work itself. And if you're still stalling, open your calculator and do the math on how many days you're working with. These are not tricks in the pop psychology sense. They are the same moves that a Roman emperor used on himself in a tent 2,000 years ago when the stakes were far higher than your inbox. They work for the same reason. They replace the abstract experience of a task with a concrete physical event that is too small for resistance to grip. The citadel that Marcus Aurelius describes throughout the Meditations is not a place of retreat. It is a place of clear perception, where you see your task for what it is, see your resistance for what it is, and choose the action anyway. You build that citadel one completed task at a time, starting with the one you've been avoiding. Once you can move through procrastination, you'll hit the next wall. The moment the work is moving, but anger at the interruptions, at the people slowing you down, at yourself, starts to erode everything you've built. That's exactly where Marcus Aurelius goes next. The next video is Why You're Always Angry, Marcus Aurelius's Anger Cure.